Obviously, an embattled Tsai Ing-wen, the pro-secession leader of Taiwan, hopes to reorganize her DPP party in the wake of the devastating setbacks in the local elections in Taiwan. Not only has her chairmanship of the ruling party been replaced by a defined senior party leader, Tseng-chang, in a power struggle, but the United States says Washington will sell submarine technology to the island. At the same time, Taipei uses its cultural relics to woo the political support of Japan. Media reports say the mainland has lost patience with the DPP, which refuses to accept the One China principle. Today, we are happy to be joined here in the Beijing studio by Huang Jing, the Dean of the Institute for International and Regional Studies at the Beijing Language and Culture University, and Zhong Houtao, a researcher with the Taiwan Studies Institute in Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. We shall also speak to Joanna Lei, Managing Director of Azul Management Limited, via satellite in Taipei. That's our topic. This is a dialogue. I'm Yang Rui. Welcome to our show here. Professor Huang and Dr. Zhong, what do you make of the new cabinet, quote unquote?
I think that 2 points. Number one, this is what we call the dig-in position. That is, we do not see any policy changes. Actually, there's not much policy options for Tsai Ing-wen. Second, from a larger picture, is that I think the Tsai Ing-wen, the DPP, will insist on its position, a very confrontational position vis-à-vis mainland China.
I just want to add several points. The first is that this new cabinet and the new so-called premier will be doomed to fail to meet those expectations from Taiwan people. After the great loss of the Yan Zhenqing election last year, most Taiwanese expect DPP and Tsai Ing-wen would reshuffle the DPP party and reshuffle the so-called cabinet. But Tsai Ing-wen just want to maintain her power, maintain her authority, and to appoint Su Tseng-chang, her old friend and actually her old rival, to restructure the new cabinet. So I think the new cabinet, there are no new faces in this cabinet, and it is very hard for them to meet those expectations from people. It is very hard for them to reform itself. I mean, both the DPP party and as well as the cabinet.
Let me cross over to Joanna Lei. What do you think of the latest cabinet reshuffling by Tsai Ing-wen, leader of DPP, to live up to the expectations of her supporters?
Well, local newspaper termed it the deja vu cabinet because it's filled with old cabinet members in the Chen Shui-bian era as well as losers in the most recent mayoral elections. One of the newspapers actually used 回锅肉, twice cooked meat, to describe this current cabinet. But I think whoever looked at it will not be surprised by seeing how notably and prominent the Chen Shui-bian fraction as well as the Taiwan independent supporters are present in this particular cabinet. And therefore, we are careful and actually quite concerned about what mainland China may read into this reshuffle.
Joanna, given the aftershocks of the latest local elections, do you believe the alleged power struggles between Su Tseng-chang, who used to be Tsai Ing-wen's boss, and Tsai Ing-wen herself, will threaten to undermine the efficiency and effectiveness of a policy execution from the perspective of the DPP?
Well, because Su Tseng-chang lost in such a landslide way, it is very difficult to see Su Tseng-chang as his old self. In the past, he was a very prominent political leader. However, since the most recent loss has demonstrated very carefully and clearly that he is already passé, it is very unimaginable that he would challenge Tsai Ing-wen's authority. But I do see a very clear and careful balance between the fractions within DPP by Tsai Ing-wen this time. So it's the new wave, Xin Chao Liu, Xin Su Xi, the new Su Tseng-chang fraction, as well as some of the other fractions are all present in this current cabinet.
Thank you so much, Joanna. Professor Huang, what do you make of the strength of the DPP? Do you think they're going to make the reorganize and regroup so that they will make an effective political comeback 2 years from now?
I think that it will be difficult, DPP. DPP's strength in the past largely lies in its position to challenge mainland China on the one hand and to challenge the KMT establishment on the other hand. It's mostly based on ideas, ideologies, rather than its policy performance. But after Chen Shui-bian, now only 2 years after Tsai Ing-wen took the office, it turned out, it's proven to the Taiwanese people that DPP is really not very good in policy area, not only in policy making but policy implementations. And also it turned out DPP is very stubborn in terms of policy orientations. It failed not only because of bad policies, failed but also because refused to change the policies that turned out to be really bad. So as a result, I think that I do not see that DPP is itself in the old time again. I think DPP organizationally is very fragmented. You can tell from the cabinet by Tseng-chang, and politically is bankrupt. And also in policy making, they don't have much in the pocket. Like I said, this formation of this new cabinet under Tseng-chang only shows to the people that it will stick to its old position. It's a dig in, will not much changes. So as a result, I don't see much strength or regrouping from DPP's point of view. I think it's just try to survive the moment.
Dr. Zhou, what do you make of the sarcastic note implied in the local media reports about the latest, the new cabinet, since they call it the losers' union? And do you think policy priorities will therefore be compromised due to the power struggle that I spoke of earlier?
As far as I am concerned, I could not regard it as a loser union. I want to regard it as an avenger union. I mean, to avenge, to revenge KMT because of those ministers, the premier, Tseng-chang, lost a lot in the last election. They just want to revenge KMT. As you know, the 15 cities and counties in Taiwan, in 22 cities and counties were controlled by KMT, and the DPP controlling the central authority. So those DPP great figures, heavyweights, just want to revenge those KMT city mayors and county legislators. So I think there will be a great conflict between the KMT and DPP, a great conflict between the local government and the so-called central government.
Joanna, it seems a defined Tsai Ing-wen, who is also increasingly embattled one way or another, turns to issue of regional security to woo support from her electorate. Do you think that's going to pay off?
Well, that has been her strategy ever since she was running the campaign. People probably remember before the 2016 election, she went to the United States and asked for U.S. support for Taiwan to be more integral into regional issues. Of course, at that time, they were talking about environment, humanitarian, and other economic development. But more recently, you can see the U.S. is using Taiwan and using the ability to bring Taiwan into its regional plan that is termed Indo-Pacific. So Tsai Ing-wen definitely has an eye onto the U.S. relationship to support herself, and this is also reflected by her current mandate or assignment of her own confidant into Washington, D.C.
Professor Huang, what do you think of the latest maneuver by Washington to sell submarine technology? Will that violate seriously the spirit of the August 17th communique that was reached between Beijing and Washington right after a relationship was normalized 40 years ago?
Yes, I think it's a violation because the agreement or the kind of understanding, mutual understanding that Beijing will to a certain degree tolerate the sales of arms to Taiwan, but it's a defensive purpose, not offensive. But this has been broken in 1990s when United States sold F-16 to 116 to Taiwan. But this time in submarines, obviously it's offensive weapons, not defensive at all. But 3 points has to be made. Number one, because United States does not produce any more conventional submarines, so United States tried to organize a kind of international club to do this, which have become buffer zone and make it worse. A second point is that United States will be a buyer, I think in most cases, to buy those technologies so that will resell to Taiwan. So countries like Japan or European countries or even India can sell the technology, may not direct to Taiwan because the retaliation from mainland will be severe, but they'll sell United States. And United States will resell Taiwan. That makes it more difficult to handle. Last but not the least, of course, it will, for the first time, give Taiwan a chance to shape up its defense industry, especially in terms of maritime technology and the security. That's also a very important point in my view.
Spokesperson of the Chinese Foreign Ministry, Madam Tsai warned those prospective dealers, be they from the United States, Japan, Europe, or India, that they should give a second thought to the sensitivity of the matter. Otherwise, China will definitely retaliate one way or another. Do you think she's going to have the attention from those participants in the game?
Of course, since Taiwan is a very important, sensitive issue in both China and U.S. relationship and China with other countries' relationship. So those countries, including United States, should be very cautious in dealing with the Taiwan issue, especially the arms sales to Taiwan. So I think both other United States or some other countries should treat the Taiwan issue very cautiously, and they should stop these kinds of arms sales. If they would sell those arms or even submarine technology to Taiwan, I think the Chinese mainland will be compelled to lodge protest and take some any necessary measures to fight back. Even I just want to show two examples. One is in 1990s, and that time Holland sent some Marines to Taiwan, and that time the Chinese mainland degraded our relationship with Holland. And just as you said, in the 1981 to 1982, the United States prepared to sell F-5 to Taiwan, and that time the two Chinese mainland and Taiwan reached a lot of negotiations and finally reached the very important communications, as you said, August 17th communique. So I think in the future, if those countries still just want to challenge our sovereignty, I think the Chinese mainland will do whatever we could do to protect our sovereignty.
Joanna, do you think the attempt by Washington to sell submarine technology to Taipei is part of what is called the Asia Reassurance Initiative Act to help defend Taiwan? Because China is always accused by Pentagon of being assertive in the South China Sea or across the Taiwan Strait.
Well, I certainly see Taiwan as more integral in the center of the Indo-Pacific strategy, if not directly from the Asia Reassurance Initiative Act, will be from the Trump administration. If you look carefully, they have shifted gradually in terms of the U.S.-Sino relationship. Initially, whenever they talk about the One China policy, it was always balanced by the three communiques on one side and Taiwan Relations Act on the other side in terms of arms sale, because the sale of defensive arms is defined by the Taiwan Relations Act, TRA. But more recently, you see them adding additional elements. On the one side, it's still the three communiques with mainland China, but on the other side, in addition to TRA, Taiwan Relations Act, they gradually added Taiwan Travel Act, and then more recently in the Section 209 in the Asia Reassurance Initiative Act, they added the 6 assurances by the Reagan administration. So the three communiques on one side is now balanced by TRA, TTA, and the 6 assurances. I definitely see that as a sea change of the U.S. policy towards the so-called One China long-standing policy. They are gradually shifting its focus.
Professor Huang, we have been discussing issues concerning the cabinet reshuffling of the DPP, the pro-secession political force, currently the ruling party in Taiwan. But what about the KMT, the opposition party that's likely to make a political comeback 2 years from now, and after winning the local elections. What do you think of their cross-strait cross-strait policies, as well as the priorities on their agenda to revitalize the local economy in Taiwan?
I think that local elections have turned out shows that first, the committee position is the correct one. That is based on the cross-strait relations based on 1992 consensus, and that's a good point. I think the most significant point made by the local election is that 1992 consensus becomes the main focus, and it's been recognized that. But there's three problems for the committee. Number one, of course, the committee really need a reshuffle up, reorganization. Its current shape is not good enough. Number two is how to connect with voters, especially those who elected, for example, Mayor of Kaohsiung, Han Kuo-yu, how to reconnect with them to shake off the old image of committee. Last but not the least, I think the committee, if you look Wu Dunyi, the current chairman's response to Chairman Xi Jinping's recent remarks on Taiwan issue, I think the committee has to find a way to close the distance on some major issues with mainland China. Otherwise, the committee, even if it could win the 2020 elections, there's still some problems. But overall, I think the situation developing in the right direction right now, because the most significant result of the local election, that the Taiwan independence is really bankrupt, like I said just now, politically.
Just to add several points with Professor Huang. The first is that the committee is indeed facing great challenges. The first one is the internal struggle, especially the incumbent chairman Wu Dunyi and the other heavyweight Zhu Lilun. I think they will compete for the candidate of the next the so-called presidential election. That means who could run for the next election. And another one is how could the committee win the heart of Taiwan people. According to the current approving rate, the committee could only take about 25% from Taiwan people. That means not very much higher than DPP. And the next point is that committee's cross-strait policy. If we compare with the committee's current cross-strait policy with its the Manju administration, I think it becomes much more conservative. So I think how could committee handle its cross-strait policy would also be a very great challenge.
Can I briefly know, have your briefing about the policy options of the mainland regarding the current power struggles in both the KMT camp and the Green camp of the DPP, since we have had this dilemma that if we obviously encourage and support the KMT, then that will lay the groundwork for the die-hard pro-secession forces to say, hey, you take side with the mainland. That will be politically risky for the mainland. Currently, what do you think of the caution and assertiveness, if any, from the mainland regarding the future of Taiwan following the local elections?
I don't think the Chinese mainland is much aggressive on its cross-strait policy. I think the Chinese mainland cross-strait policy or Taiwan policy is clear and consistent. That is our fundamental or guiding principle is one country and two systems and peaceful reunification. We have never changed these guiding lines in the past 40 years. So I think in the future we will continue about by this principle. Still, I want to say another point, that is our policy is become much more clear than before. For example, in the latest Xi Jinping's speech just several days ago, he defines the 1992 consensus again. And in the past, we just defined 1992's consensus as its core connotation, one China principle. But now we defined it as 2 points, 2 core points or 2 core connotations. One is the two sides belong to one country, and another one is both sides should strive for reunification. So in future, I think the Chinese mainland will continue to abide by our policy and will show our goodwillness for Taiwan people. Still, we will do whatever to deter those Taiwan independence.
Joanna, you've been following our discussion here in the Beijing studio. Now, what the mainland authorities have been doing over the course of past decades regarding cross-strait relationship is, on the one hand, to strengthen the economic integration across the strait. On the other hand, I believe the mainland has created a lot of job opportunities to appeal to the mind and heart of the younger generation in Taiwan. What do you think of the continuity and consistency of such policy options from the mainland perspective? Will that pay off to win the heart of the younger generation in Taiwan?
Well, I certainly see that the DPP is trying very hard to use political doctrine indoctrination to the young people by pulling Taiwan apart from mainland China. And DPP is not only using all its economic power, but also by providing opportunities to the young people and pulling them towards mainland China. So these two, one is political ideology and the other is economic reality, are working in opposite directions. I was just listening to your discussion in the studio. I think it's most important in the recent discussion by Mr. Xi Jinping that you have to put cross-strait relationship, especially status quo, in the context of a peaceful solution to the cross-strait issue. So once we focus on peace, then it is very clear that whatever we talk about, whatever policy options or other tangible options for Taiwan, it is not about independence or unification. It is about maintaining peace. And what Tsai Ing-wen has promised the people in terms of maintenance of status quo should also be focusing on maintaining peace. And she has to answer that fundamental question. If she continues to push an independent agenda, then how would she answer her own promise? How would she deliver the maintenance of peace as a status quo?
Thank you so much, Joanna. Recently, the Taiwan authorities offered to display a masterpiece by Yan Zhenqing in Japan. I mean, that's pretty rare. What do you think of the implications of this move, Dr. Zhong?
I think it is a great move of desinicization or desinification, since the great work of Yan Zhenqing is a very traditional and very precious relic of Chinese traditional culture. It should be preserved in either Taiwan or in Chinese mainland. But if it is transported to Taiwan, it would be damaged or even hurt in the process of transportation. And when it was transported to Japan, it is said that those visitors could take photo of this great relic, great masterpiece, and I think that would do a great damage for this relic. So I think the Taiwan authority or Tsai Ing-wen authority is not preserving our relic. It is damaging our culture or the relic. And another point is that actually the Tsai Ing-wen authority, after taking her office, is just want to take some desinicization act. For example, in the Taiwan high or senior middle school, those students were forbidden to learn Chinese history. I think that would be a great move.
I think that what really matters to me is the attitude, different attitude, because this piece is so precious and is so fragile, so that the people in Taiwan, the people in mainland China would not allow to see it because it has been guided such a way, it's been put in certain conditions for almost over 10 years, a decade. People cannot see it in the exhibition. But now the Tsai Ing-wen administration, will ship it to Japan to be seen by the Japanese. That's obviously double standards. If you cannot show it to your own people, but you try to show it to Japanese, which has a history issue with China, of course, that's a double kind of insult to people in China and in Taiwan.
Tsai Ing-wen is just want to flatter Japan authority, I think, because she just want to maintain a good relationship with Japan, to show that she has a capability to maintain a very good administration result, to just want to rerun the next election.
Joanna, it's an open secret that the first generation of the DPP leadership sought their shelter in Japan, where they were educated and trained by the Japanese politicians. And then they came back to start the movement of independence. What do you think of the Japanese influence on the future of Taiwan? We are not talking about the past, the colonial past, but looking to the future, what do you think of the Japanese influence?
Oh, I just want to quickly add, in Taiwan, when calligraphy like this is exhibited, it's always in a climate, humidity, and light-controlled environment because they are very precious and very fragile. In terms of Chen Qinan, who is now heading the Palace Museum, his own thesis is Taiwan should be seen as the center of the Pacific Mediterranean. And Taiwan, in his own concoction, is in his imagination, is formed as a multicultural, multi-ethnicity place with people coming from the Dutch, the Spain, the British, the Japanese, and the Chinese. So while we usually use the sinotization to describe their movement, they are actually diluting the importance of Chinese culture and lineage in Taiwan. So as such, Taiwan, the Chinese lineage become one of the multiple cultures that has been on this island. And that is a very dangerous thesis now promoted by people like Chen Qinan, head of the Palace Museum. And that is why it's no surprise that they would treat Chinese treasures as other treasures, as Japanese treasures, Southeast Asian treasures. It is actually unconscionable for them to treat Yan Zhenqing's calligraphy this way.
What do you make of the Japanese feedback? Do you think the Japanese will cultivate more influence politically in the island?
Well, Japan is already heavily involved in Taiwan. If you come and visit Taiwan like you did a number of years ago, you can now see multiple Japanese signs advertising, even in television. You will see a very prominent display of Japanese culture, which was not there a few years ago. A few years ago, there may be some prominent display of U.S. culture, Chinese culture, but now Japanese culture is definitely gaining prominence in Taiwan, and that is, I think, intentional by the current DPP government.
Thank you so much. To conclude our discussion here, Professor Huang, what do you think of the Japanese influence, which we haven't been able to discuss very much on the program here?
I think that the Japanese influence has been measured two ways. Number one, Japan is the most important ally of the United States. Since the United States is going to increase the leverage of Taiwan vis-a-vis China, of course, Japan has an important role to play. And second perspective, of course, is history. And Japan has always seen Taiwan as very important for Japan's development, especially for Japan's security. In other words, Japan would not be happy to see if Taiwan move into China's way. So from both international perspective and Japan's own perspective, I think Japan will play, I think, not a very positive role in Taiwan's future regarding its reunification with mainland China.
As Prime Minister Shinzo Abe is in a good mood to improve relationship with PRC, will Tokyo be very, very careful in handling things like cultural relics exchanges, cultural exchanges, and particularly in shaping the future of Taiwan?
2 points. The first, Japan is not willing to see the reunification between Chinese mainland and Taiwan, just as Professor Huang said. Another point is that Japan will continue to support DPP rather than KMT as the ruling party in future.
Thank you so much. With that, we come to the end of this brainstorming on the future of Taiwan, particularly latest political moves by the DPP, the pro-independence political force, to revitalize its strength in order to win the elections 2 years from now. So next time, until then, goodbye.